Eysenur was more than 200 meters away from where the Israeli soldiers were.
And then the Lebanese militias were allowed in. And he said you could hear the noise, attacks, and the Israelis then put up flares so the massacre could go on into the night.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. About the murder of Eysenur Ezgi, I won't say much. Democracy Now! Did an excellent job covering it on September 9th. Ezgi was part of the international solidarity movement. Rachel Corrie and Tom Herndl were two other members of the ISM who were killed by Israeli forces. But I'm going to read from the website of the ISM. Some media reports have repeated false claims that ISM activists threw rocks during the peaceful demonstration in Beta. All eyewitness accounts refute this claim. Eysenur was more than 200 meters away from where the Israeli soldiers were, and there were no confrontations there at all in the minutes before she was shot. Regardless, from such distance, neither she nor anyone else could have possibly been perceived as posing any threat. She was killed in cold blood. So she was shot from about 2 football fields away. I want to concentrate on the response from the Biden-Harris administration. As of September 9th, no one in the White House had bothered to call the Ezgi family. Supposedly, they were waiting for the Israeli government to gather the facts. White House spokesperson Vedant Patel was specifically asked at a briefing about President Joe Biden's past vow that America would respond if a U.S. citizen was targeted anywhere in the world. He repeated, what the president was talking about was a terrorist attack or a direct attack from a state or non-state actor. In other words, if the American is killed by one of our goon allies, that's a whole different matter. Patel was also asked by The Intercept's Prem Tucker how the U.S. could have any confidence in an Israeli investigation given the lack of any conclusion of the Israeli investigation into the killing of Hind Rajab. You recall Tucker has repeatedly asked about the Israeli killing of Rajab since January. But the State Department's deputy spokesman would only repeat himself. The U.S. government would not interfere in the process carried out by the Israeli government to determine what had happened, and he would not get ahead of that process in the coming days. Someone finally asked Biden himself about Ezgi. The president's initial response was apparently it was an accident, ricocheted off the ground and just got hit by accident. I'm working that out now, he told reporters. Then a few days later, Biden said he was outraged and deeply saddened. It must not happen again. Kamala Harris said much the same. The two said it was a tragedy. Rubbish. A tragedy is when someone's car slips in the rain and hits a tree. This was murder. But all Israel has to do to please Biden-Harris is to act better next time. The murderer doesn't have to be arrested. His bosses don't need to go on trial. All that's needed is for Israel to promise to do better. Some people are asking for a U.S. investigation or an international investigation. Sorry, that's a mistake. The facts are plain. No investigation is needed. Israel is an out-of-control killing machine, which murders even peaceful citizens of its greatest benefactor. The thing to demand is a cutoff of all weapons to that vile government. Now some who demanded just that outside of the Philadelphia debate arena.
Let me see that shirt. Let me see that shirt. Let's do it.
Back to more coverage of the September 2nd rally and protest and march in New York City. First, two interviews. Would you care to give your name for the interview?
My name is Julie. I live in Yonkers.
Julie, could you talk about your sign?
Yes.
And the message to Kamala
Yes,
Harris?
Kamala Harris has been saying that she supports Israel. I want to know, which Israel does she support? Does she support the Israel of the 500,000 people who were on the streets earlier today demanding a ceasefire and a negotiated exchange of hostages in prisons? Or does she support the ceasefire of Netanyahu and Smotrich and the fascists who want to continue the genocide in Gaza, who want to continue killing children and bombing hospitals and destroying homes?
So far, the message has been
Pretty clear.
supports the latter group.
It's pretty clear that she's against the people of Israel, that she's against bringing the hostages home alive. Anything so that our military-industrial complex can keep making money off of war. Anything to support the forever wars that are making Raytheon and all the other, Halliburton and all the other war corporations rich.
A sarcastic sign from students at Cooper Union, a famous institute where Abraham Lincoln spoke in 1860. Students complaining about repression of their activities for Palestine. And these are some of the Extinction Rebellion flags. There was a whole bunch of them at the Rally for Palestine. And to coverage by Dave Lippman, first of the anti-genocide march. Then some activists went from the anti-genocide parade to the Labor Day parade that had been organized by some unions. You'll notice midway through they heckle Senator Schumer as Genocide Chuck.
In June, we became the first New York City public sector union to endorse the divestment of our pension funds from Israel. Why do so many of our unions shut down conversation when it comes to Palestine? Why can't our union commit to divestment from Israel? These injuries, these deaths, are all funded by our tax dollars, enabled by our politicians, enabled by our labor, ignored by our union leadership, and supported by our elected officials. Despite the majority of Americans supporting an immediate halt of weapons transfers, Biden, Harris, and Trump have pledged continual, unconditional military support for the IOF in defiance of international and U.S. law. Shame. All of us, actors, filmmakers, crew, creators, artists, have a responsibility to show the world as it is, as it was, and as it could be.
They try to silence us to keep us from speaking out against the genocide. They try to silence us to keep us from speaking out for a free Palestine.
Too many of our unions are blocking our ability to have democratic votes about what to do with our pension funds, and that is wrong.
You're paid off by AIPAC. You're paid off by AIPAC.
Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta. These companies build tools of suppression, surveillance, and violence to support Israel and their genocide of the Palestinian people. So in turn, it is our moral obligation as tech workers to do all we can to stop this by refusing to allow our labor to be exploited for genocide.
From the 1936 Palestinian revolt through today, Palestinian workers have resisted Zionist expropriation with demonstrations, strikes, and arms. The UAW, along with 6 other unions, has called for a ceasefire and arms embargo. Today, we will proudly carry our message of international solidarity on a day meant to suppress it.
I don't believe the video shows the American Federation of Teachers' mighty New York City chapter. Every school in Gaza is closed now for the 2nd year, and the teacher union brass hasn't said squat. If you recall, 2 weeks ago I interviewed Don Wagner, an ordained Presbyterian minister and a longtime activist for Palestinian rights. We talked about his opposition to Christian Zionism. In this new interview, we talk about his experiences in September of 1982 when he went to the Sabra and Shatila camps in Beirut, Lebanon, just after a massive massacre. Somewhere between 1,400 and 3,000 Palestinians and Lebanese were slaughtered. We're recording on September 11th, just days before the anniversary of the terrible Sabra and Shatila massacres of mid-September in 1982. You were an eyewitness to its aftermath. Could you describe what you saw?
Right. I was with a group of 3, and we arrived in Beirut the day after the massacre, early in the morning, and we went down to our host, Gabi Habib, who was the head of the Middle East Council of Churches, and he was convening a meeting with about 25 physicians and nurses, many of whom were eyewitnesses to the massacre as they were serving in Palestinian hospitals adjacent to or in Sabra Shatila. And Gabi said, you need to get right over to the site of the massacre. So we walked in, and we entered right at the point where the Israeli command center, a 6-story tower where they could see everything. So we saw that, and immediately we were handed a handkerchief doused with cologne by Red Crescent or Red Cross workers. They said, you have to hold this over your mouth, your nose, because the stench of death will make you sick. As we walked closer, some of the families were just coming back for the first time, and the workers were pulling bodies or pieces of bodies out. It was about 95 degrees and humid, so the bodies had decomposed, and it was just a surreal sense of death everywhere. And I was able to find a person who spoke English. He was a shopkeeper. His English was pretty good. And he told me that he had been out of the camp for a couple of days buying supplies for his little shop. And he tried to get back in that Friday, and the Israelis had sealed off all the entrances. So he stayed with a cousin who had a balcony that overlooked Sabra Shatila. So he saw everything.
Mm.
And he saw the Israelis initially, he said, fire several rounds of ammunition into the camps, and then the Lebanese militias were allowed in. And he said you could hear the noise, attacks, and the Israelis then put up flares so the massacre could go on into the night. And he said, I couldn't imagine, what would happen to my daughters, my son, and my wife. And sure enough, one son escaped, but everyone else was killed. He lost everything. And he described how they also bulldozed. After they did the slaughter, they brought in bulldozers and leveled the place. And, it was just, it's the worst thing I ever experienced in my life. I did 2 or 3 more interviews. Sorry?
You saw the bulldozers?
No, I just saw the aftermath of it.
I see.
Yeah, everything was leveled. There was hardly a building standing. And these are the little brick tiny hovels or shops where the Palestinians lived. And I interviewed a few, 2 or 3 others, and one was a young fellow who escaped. He got out the back as before the militias came, and he somehow made his way to a mosque and survived. I remember sitting, I couldn't take too much anymore, and I imagine here am I, I won't have to live. I didn't lose anybody. But the grief and the terror was just so overwhelming. And I sat on a mound of hill, and it turned out I was sitting next to 3 or 4 French journalists, and we watched kind of a parade of body bags being carried and deposited into a mass burial site. And I remember speaking to the woman beside me, and she spoke good English, and she was crying. And I said, I'm sorry. She said, I've been here for 3 weeks covering the end of the invasion and the evacuation of the PLO. And now this, how much more can these people take? And I said, how many do you think are in this mass grave? She said, I was counting and I lost track. But look, turn to your right. They were digging another mass grave. And who knows how many. And then I saw a Muslim sheikh, walk by, and I excused myself. I ran and caught up with him. And I apologized. And I said, my heart goes out to all of you. Are you the imam of the mosque nearby? I'd seen that mosque. And he said, yeah, I am. And he said, can you imagine that many of these people were with me at Friday prayers before all this happened? And I said, how many do you think the Israelis or the militias have killed here? And he said, we'll never know, because I remember looking out from my mosque on Friday afternoon or Friday evening, and I saw them line up people, men, machine gun them to death, and then load their bodies onto trucks. And he said, they did this over and over. We'll never know where these bodies are. And his estimate was, I think, 2,000 to 3,000, but it was a total guess.
Right.
So so I was not in there when it happened, but I saw the aftermath. I saw, the broken-hearted families coming back, women screaming as body parts of their children were pulled out. Why, oh Allah, oh why? This is our destiny as Palestinians. So it was just a very grim, surreal, ugly thing. And I was struck that this is a sign of the continuing Nakba. This qualified as a genocide, at least as a war crime. But there was intent, mass murder, et cetera, and then the attempt to cover up.
We have an extensive collection of links to articles and photos about Sabra Shatila. Aim your cell phone at this QR code to get to it. If you recall, in a big and happy surprise, the United Left in France beat out the fascists several months ago in a parliamentary runoff election. By all rights, President Macron, whose own party finished very poorly, should have appointed someone from the left to be prime minister. However, after meeting with someone from the fascist National Front, Macron appointed a right-winger to be prime minister, a man whose party only got 4% of the vote.
In France, tens of thousands of people took to the streets Saturday to protest President Emmanuel Macron's appointment of conservative Michel Barnier as the new prime minister. Leftist parties, which won the most votes in July's snap parliamentary elections, accused Macron of stealing the election. This is Benjamin Lucas, a deputy from the leftist New Popular Front coalition.
By appointing Michel Barnier, the President of the French Republic has decided to spit in the face of the millions of French people who turned out on July 7th to vote in a historic election. The question before us was whether or not we wanted the extreme right to win in this country. The French said no. There was a massive turnout, the highest since 1981. The message was clear. We don't want the extreme right in power.
Do not expect the French left to take this lying down. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for the Struggle Video News.